Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and check it out, got a whole bunch of pickups. These come from a Japanese store chain called Hard Off. Now, I've talked about them in the past, I've even done videos on them in the past, and this time I actually was sent out to Japan back in March of 2018, so while I was there, I hit up as many Book Offs and Hard Offs as I could. Book Off is another chain of stores that sells video games, as does Hard Off. Now, neither store actually specializes in video games, they just happen to sell a lot of them. Hard Off is a hardware store, hence you see a lot of hardware on the table. And Book Off, well, obviously the title is obvious what it is. It has more of the game software, but that doesn't mean Hard Off doesn't have games. That's a weird chain, man. Like, they also have Garage Off and Liquor Off and Hobby Off and like just a lot of different offs. House Off, I think, is another one of them. It's a lot of cool stuff over there. But yeah, I do want to say that you're not going to see a whole lot of Hard Off footage in this video. The reason for that, as I explained in my Book Off video, is that ever since the Paul Logan, or Logan Paul, whatever the fuck his name is, ever since he did his thing in Japan, we were kind of warned straight up, like, be careful about filming. The Japanese are super sensitive to that, and YouTubers are perceived as like total scum right now. So just, you can't even use that as an excuse. You just kind of, if you're gonna film anything, be extremely quick and careful. So as a result, I just kind of played it safe. So I apologize for that, but you know, what do you want? I wasn't gonna risk getting kicked out of there, so that is what it is. But anyway, so got a whole bunch of cool stuff, and I wanted to show it to you guys. So again, if you haven't seen the Book Off video, you probably should do that first, but otherwise we'll move on. So anyway, the first thing we're going to talk about is this. This is the most obvious one. It's just sitting here, the giant 60 gigabyte PS3. Now, the reason I'm starting with this is the one you guys are most likely to have seen, because I actually tweeted about it when I was in the store where I picked it up. Now, the reason I did that is, here's the deal with this PS3. It's the 60 gigabyte launch model, meaning it's the full backwards compatible version that plays not only the PS3 games and the PS1 games, but it actually plays the PS2 games, not through emulation, but through hardware. This is the launch version, which means it's the most sought after version of the PS3, because shortly after that, Sony started stripping that feature out to reduce production costs of the console. Now, I have the American version of this. However, PS1 and PS2 games are actually region locked. So the logic of getting one of these is the ability to play Japanese PS1 and PS2 games. And I ended up finding it for 6,000 yen, which is a really good deal for one of these things. And that's why I tweeted about it, because I showed a picture of the information about it, asking everybody who spoke Japanese, like, what's the deal? What am I missing? Why is this only 6,000 yen? And a bunch of people got back to me saying they read it and it basically says nothing's wrong with it. You must have just got lucky. Because that was the weird part, was on the shelf next to it, there was a whole bunch of other PS3s, and they were all the correct price. They were in the, you know, 100,000, 120,000 price range for this thing. 6,000 yen, that's like $58. So that's pretty good deal for one of these. So very happy about that. And yeah, it works perfectly, nothing really wrong with it. So it's a little dirty, admittedly, but I could clean that up, no problem. But yeah, other than that, now I can play PS1 and PS2 Japanese games, as well as I also have, I forget what DVD region Japan is, but I guess now I have that. But I'm pretty sure they have the same Blu-ray region coding as us, so I don't really get that advantage. But still, very cool. And I'm hoping at one point to get the European or Australian, doesn't make a difference, PS3 60 gigabyte fat model for exactly the same reason. I'd love to be able to have access to the European PS1 and PS2 game library. But for now, definitely set on that. Speaking of PlayStation 2 content, the only PS2 game I picked up over there, it's not even really a game, was this. This just caught my attention because of the McDonald's logo. I told you I grew up as a fat kid. Come on, I've said that before many times. I like McDonald's-based games, probably for that reason. But this one isn't a game so much as a demo. This is actually called the McDonald's Original Happy Disc. This was, I believe, at one point a Happy Meal toy. Japan got fucking PS2 games as Happy Meal toys. What's up with that? But really, it's not really a game. It's a promotional disc for Parappa the Rapper 2, and I think it's Ape Escape or Ape Island 2. And 2001. So yeah, it's just a demo disc basically, and after you beat both of the two primary demos, there is some sort of McDonald's based demo or game on there. Very, very limited game, but it was in the 100 yen bin, which is basically about 90 cents. So I was like, fuck, that's just weird. I'll pick that up just for the oddball factor. So there you go, and I tested it out on this PS3 and it worked perfectly fine. So very, very cool. So speaking of McDonald's-based content, one thing I picked up I didn't even know existed. There is a McDonald's game for the Game Gear. Now, the reason that's kind of interesting to me is that there was another McDonald's, Ronald McDonald's Treasureland Adventure for the Sega Genesis. That's actually where I initially started talking about McDonald's and video games, and I made this joke about how I wanted it because I was a fat kid. And that's, again, still seeds throughout, doesn't it? But I was curious because I had no idea there was a Game Gear version. So I looked it up and it turns out it's a Japanese exclusive and it's considered like a hidden gem, like a true hidden gem. It's a really, really good game that simply never came out outside of Japan. And it's basically the Japanese Game Gear version of that Sega Genesis game. So I'm actually very excited to play this because I'm yet to find a game on the Game Gear that really just, I had to invest a ton of time in, but oddly enough, this could be it because I really like platformers and this one apparently was unique and exclusive to the fucking Game Gear. So definitely want to check that out at some point. So very, very cool to find that. Next up, I found this. This is Sound Novel something for the Super Famicom. Super Famicom is, of course, Nintendo's, the Japanese version of the Super Nintendo. It looks different than ours, but it looks the same as the European model, actually, but different than ours, but it's the same exact console. Now, this cartridge in particular is not a standard example of a Super Famicom cartridge. They're usually much smaller, and they have a top that doesn't have like a cartridge port at the top. The reason this cartridge is interesting is this is one of the 8 titles released for the Super Famicom that is also compatible with the Satellaview. The Satellaview was an add-on for the Super Famicom that allowed it to connect to the internet and have additional, well, the then version of the internet, I guess, that had additional online capabilities. And there were various games that supported extra data through that internet connection using these cartridge ports. I picked up a couple of titles for the Dreamcast, which was very nice to do because I very rarely get to pick up new Dreamcast content because I have it all on first world problems. But yeah, there's a few items out there naturally that I don't have, and this is one of them. This is the Dream Passport for the Japanese Sega Dreamcast. This is basically the broadband disc, or not even the broadband disc, the 56K online disc, like the web browser. Really nothing special. But funny enough, I didn't have it. I had Dream Passport 2 and Dream Passport 3. This is Dream Passport 1. So it's really very worthless and really can't do anything. Version 1.01 as it says on the back. It's actually factory sealed, but since I can't really do anything with it, I have no reason to open it. So it's just kind of cool to pick up. Again, junk bin, 100 yen, nothing, but definitely cool just to have. So there you go, got that. And then another thing for the Dreamcast I found that I didn't know existed at all, and it's kind of an interesting little story to this one. This is the Karat, K-A-R-A-T DC. It's basically action replay for Japanese Dreamcast games. So it's a code device. It also could function as an import disc, that kind of thing. What's interesting about this is that the hard-off that I got this at had 2 of them. One of them was with their Dreamcast games, and that was this one. And it was about 20 bucks. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a lot for, you know, just a cheat disc, basically, right? So I was kind of hesitant about it, but I looked it up online, and online it was very, very uncommon, but a couple of listings that did exist at all were rather expensive. So I was like, okay, maybe that's not bad. And I walk around the corner in the same store to like the glass case where they have all the super rare stuff, and they had this exact same disc in there, and they wanted 10,000 yen, which is about 100 bucks. And I was like, okay. So I think what I got was the misprint one that they accidentally charged way cheaper and put it in there. So all of a sudden I was actually very happy with the logic of only paying about 2,000 yen. So there you go. So I picked that up. Now, as I mentioned, there's other chains there. There's not just Book Off and Hard Off, there's Hobby Off and House Off and all these things. So this one technically came from Hobby Off, not House Off, or not Hard Off or Book Off, and it's also not video game related, but I wanted to show you guys anyway. I picked up a Time Machine DeLorean Hot Wheel. If you've seen some of my videos, I've let it seep throughout that I really like not only Back to the Future, but in particular the Time Machine DeLorean. I know it's not a character, but I kind of treat it like one, and I have a ton of Back to the Future merch as a result. I'm even, you know, I edited Back to the Future 4 and 5 as movies on this channel based on Back to the Future, the game by Telltale. So I'm a big fan. So because of that, Japan actually gets a lot of cool Time Machine DeLorean merchandise. A lot of really cool ones that I've shown in some videos, but also a lot of big ones I could never get back here. But in this case, this was a small little one. It was cheap, so I was like, I'm definitely pulling the trigger on that. That was cool. I've also mentioned in the book off video and in other videos that I kind of want to get, as another subset, much like this, the full Japanese exclusive N64 set, which sounds daunting because there was like 80 games released there. But believe it or not, before this trip to Japan, I actually had like 65 of them. So I was like mostly done. And on this trip, I managed to, I think I whittled it down by another like 6 or so. Most of them were at book off. The only one I found at a hard off was this one. Which I don't remember the name of, but I'll put it up on the screen. It's something, something, something 2. So there you go. I managed to find that. So happy about getting yet another one off of the list. Now, speaking of more Nintendo-based content, sort of. So you'll see this stack here. And this is probably a little confusing as to what this is. And this was my most, really, Adam? Really? Are you going to buy this? Really? Purchase of the entire trip. So let me just show you what it is and then explain it. For the Sega Pico, we have Pokemon something or other. And for the Sega Pico, we have Pokemon something or other else. And for the Sega Pico, we have Pokemon something or other else Hyper Omega Edition. I don't know the fucking difference. And then on top of that, we also have for the Sega Veena, Pokemon something something something. Okay, so here's the deal. There's a couple of things that bear explanation here. First, the Sega Pico was a child's console, like very much a child, like a little kid's adolescent toy console, released in Japan and the States and maybe Europe, I'm not sure about that. That was designed just for little kids to be able to paint and stuff in games, like just very, very basic stuff. It was basically at its core a Sega Genesis, just tripped up to be a little different for children. And later on, I'm not kidding about this, I didn't know this, but in 2005, Sega released their actual final console, which was this, the Sega Veena. I'd never heard of it before. I'm embarrassed, and they should be too. But anyway, so they released that. Now, why would I get all this crap? Why? Because the truth is, I don't even like Pokemon. I think Pokemon is like any anime to me, has just never been exciting or interesting. I'm sorry, anime is not my thing. It never has been. So why would I suddenly pick up 4 Pokemon games? Well, as a lot of you will know, Sega has been a third-party publisher and developer for a long time, really since about 2001, 2002. And they've done a lot of games for Nintendo hardware. On the flip side of that, though, Nintendo has actually done a couple of games on Sega hardware, and these are them. Nintendo made these Pokemon games for the Sega hardware, and I thought that's just kind of cool for the oddball factor, to have games for a Sega console produced by Nintendo. I don't know, that's the only reason I got them, that and they were cheap. But like I've never seen any of them in person, and yet this one hard-off had all of them. There might actually be more, I'm not totally sure, but at least all of these. This is the only one I'd ever seen before, is the Sega Veena one. I've seen this at Video Games New York and Manhattan for like a lot more money than I paid for it. I paid a couple of bucks. I mean, understandably, it's an oddball, rare item with a lot of bizarre history around it, and getting it over there is a pain in the ass and all that, and I get why they would charge more than that, but my point is, I've seen it once, and it was much more than I paid for it. So the idea of getting it was just kind of cool. And yes, I had the opportunity to buy a Sega Veena, but I didn't pull that trigger because I was like, do I really want to waste the remaining luggage space on something like that? I decided not to. Maybe in the future I'll get one, who knows. I would have to have kind of run out of other more interesting things to get. This I got because cheap and interesting for the strangeness factor, but that's really it. Incidentally, for those potentially mocking Sega for this, it turns out Sony makes one of these too. I even found one. It's called the Kid Station. To be honest, I had no idea this was a thing. I had never heard of it. Obviously didn't pick it up, but I thought you guys might get a kick out of that. So moving on, speaking of other Nintendo hardware that I wanted, I finally got this. That is the GameCube ASCII controller, keyboard controller. Now, if you're not familiar with this, I've actually mentioned this in a video once last year. I found this in a bargain bin in Osaka last year in 2017, and I really wanted to get it after I passed on it. I passed on it thinking, whatever, I'm sure I'll see this a million times, only to come out and find out later it's really not very common. So when I went back to that same Super Potato, it was long gone. And so I kind of regretted that. And on this trip, I managed to find it. This time I found it in the box, which was great. And for really cheap too, this was 20 bucks. Now, if you look online, you'll see that that's a really good deal for this thing. So I was very happy about that. Now, to be honest with you, this controller is not exactly useless, but is mostly useless. It was designed for Phantasy Star Online specifically, allowing you to be able to play the GameCube game while being able to quickly switch to text and, you know, back and forth. And presumably, if had there been more games that supported the keyboard, that might have been useful, but as far as I know, there really weren't any others, so it's really just for that game. So in a weird way, it's kind of a Sega peripheral that Sega had nothing to do with, but it still is definitely cool. But yeah, it actually would work as just a straight up GameCube controller. If you just felt like holding a GameCube controller like really oddly, you could actually use it that way. So there you go, just odd, but I really wanted it. And speaking of other strange hardware, or no, actually screw that. Speaking of the GameCube, let's stay on GameCube. I picked up a few more titles for it. I mentioned in my book off video that kind of like the N64, what I wanted to do was try and pick up as many of the regional exclusives as possible, because I figured, like, how often am I ever going to be back in Japan? Probably not very often, and all of a sudden I've been sent there a bunch of times. It's been very strange. But that said, my goal remained the same, try and pick them up. So at Hard Off, didn't do as well as I did at Book Off, but I did manage to get a few. I got Shaman King Soul Fight, Bomberman Land 2, which is kind of odd because the other Bomberman games all came out here, but this one didn't, at least on GameCube. I don't remember the exact name of this. It's like Bo something. I don't know enough about it. And then finally, one that was actually very hard to find any information on is Something Roses. Anytime I looked this up, I really only found results for the PS2 version. I found information that a GameCube version exists, but beyond that, I couldn't really find anything, including price listings. So I had no idea if I overpaid or underpaid. I paid $9. I kind of figured, considering I couldn't find any information on it, that's probably not bad, because it's probably, if it's sold at auction or something, probably would go for a lot more. But I could be dead wrong about that, hard to say. Either way, I don't regret the purchase. So there you go, got a couple of GameCube games. I also got some Neo Geo CD games. I mentioned this before too. Last year I picked up a Neo Geo CD front loader console at Super Potato Akihabara, Tokyo, and it didn't work, or at least it's labeled as not working. It was labeled as broken. It cost $18, but it came with no controller, no games, no cables of any kind, just the console. So I took the chance on that, because a buddy of mine said even if it doesn't work, he thinks he can get it to work. So I was like, all right, sure. While I was there, I managed to find a controller, so I bought that. And when I got back and I told this same story, a company actually sent me RGB SCART cables for it. So all I need now is the power supply, which is something I've kind of been working on. I'm thinking I'll go like a third-party route. But anyway, I figured since I was going back to Japan and Neo Geo CD games are vastly more common there, why don't I try and pick some up? Because the last couple of times I'd been there, I'd found them very cheap, but I wasn't buying them because I didn't own the platform. Now I do, in the sense that, in the most technical of sense, I have it, but you know, it doesn't necessarily work. But anyway, I thought future-proof a little bit, get some cheap Japanese Neo Geo CD games. So oddly, I didn't have that much luck this time though. I really wasn't finding them very often, but I did manage to find a few at Hard Off, so here's what I got. Real Bout, Fatal Fury, Far East of Eden, King of Fighters 98, Sonic Wings 3, and Top Hunter Roddy and Cathy. So there you go. Added a few Neo Geo CD games to the list. Hopefully I can get that console to work. Or hopefully it just works once I have a power supply. We'll see. Because the Japanese definition of junk, as I've said before, is it's missing a part. Not that it's actually necessarily broken. So it could be the thing works flawlessly and it's just, we don't have the cables, I don't know, it's junk, throw it away. Like, that's a very different definition, but that's kind of typically how they do it. So I'm hopeful, I'm hopeful. But speaking of Neo Geo CD, the other thing I got for it was a controller. Now, as I mentioned before, I actually did already pick up a controller for this, so I didn't actually need this. But the thing is, Neo Geo CD controllers are not common, even over there. This is actually only the second one I've ever even seen. The first one I bought. So I kind of figured having a backup controller, there's dumber ideas. For especially, it was about 20 bucks, which, yeah, I didn't want to pay 20 bucks, but it's much more than that online. And just having a second controller is useful, especially because this actually does work also on the Neo Geo AES. So having another controller, not the worst idea. So very cool to get that. Now, one thing that probably was the worst idea, I have to give a shout out here to my buddy Kelsey Lewin, who kind of talked me into this. I got this. This is for the Bandai WonderSwan, the Handy Sonar. This is a fishing device for the Bandai WonderSwan. That is a real thing. You would connect it to the console or the handheld, and it came with all this equipment, and it's literally designed to help you detect fish so that you can catch fish. This is real. I bought this. I own it now. Yeah, exactly. I agree. Why did I do that? Well, Kelsey kind of talked me into it because I know she's really into the Bandai WonderSwan, and she'd had me kind of checking out to see if I could find some of these other WonderSwan things, which unfortunately I didn't. But I did see this, and it caught my attention, so I sent her a message saying, like, do you have this? And she was like, I paid so much more than that for that thing, and mine's not nearly as good a shape. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Because this one's in pretty solid shape. It's complete, has a decent box. It was only 3,000 yen. She paid, I won't say what, but she paid a lot more than that for this thing. So, yeah, because of that, I decided to pick it up because who knows, maybe I'll get into the WonderSwan. Because clearly, not a common item. Strange as hell. The thing is, back in the day, peripherals like this got made because companies, that was before everybody had like smartphones, and the concept of having gadgets like that was not super common. So it was actually cheaper for a lot of these companies to say, all right, we can just use the computing power of something that already exists, like the Game Boy or the Game Gear or the WonderSwan or whatever, and just make our strange device for that. And that'll save us money because then we'll just throw that in with the market of people who are actually getting the stuff. Like one of the WonderSwan things, there's some sort of medical equipment that exists only for the WonderSwan, and it was designed to only work with the specific WonderSwan they shipped it with. You know, like weird stuff like that. I know the Game Boy had a sewing machine. You know, like there's all sorts of bizarre stuff out there like this. Those days are long over. People aren't making shit like this anymore. But yeah, so I just thought that was kind of cool for that reason. But still, let's be honest, kind of a pointless thing to get. But speaking of cool, weird, oddball accessories that aren't totally pointless and yet kind of are in a weird way, I found something I had also looked for in Osaka, I had seen and passed on. Boom. That is the Beretta 92FS light gun for the original Xbox. That is designed to look like a real handgun, a real Beretta. And it's got actual weight to it, man. It's pretty nice. Now, I had found it in Osaka last year, and I had passed on it, convinced that if I put it in my suitcase, I'd get flagged. This time around, I found it, and I wasn't gonna get it, but my buddy was like, dude, even if they scan it, it's not gonna come off as a gun, it's gonna come off as plastic. They're not gonna detect it. They would have to actually open it up and look at it to see that it looks like a gun, and if they did that, they'd realize it's not really a gun. So you'll be fine. And I was like, okay, man, I got you. So I went ahead and I bought it, and yeah, it's very cool. Very odd original Xbox stuff over there. They didn't get much in the way of original Xbox content that we didn't, but the stuff they got, man, some of it is really cool and really strange. So very happy to have that. I think that's just really, really neat. But yeah, very, very cool. Unfortunately, kind of useless though, because it doesn't work on a modern TV, but still just neat to have. But now something that would work on a modern TV, but ironically I would not use, I got this console. I got the PC Engine Shuttle. This one is kind of funny. Now, I don't know the full extended reason of why this thing exists, but what I do know about it is that it is the PC Engine, and it's a remake of it, or a re-release of it. Obviously designed to look kind of like a shuttle, or at least that's what they called it after they realized it looked like a shuttle. But the thing about it is that it had AV out on it, composite out. Now, you have to remember the PC Engine originally only had RF, so having a model with AV seemed superior. The great irony of this is that now you can use the older models, you can actually put in things like the AV engine block and even third-party alternatives, and you can get RGB out of the console, whereas this one you actually can't do that, so it actually gets worse video than the original models through modern technology. It's just kind of ironic. So really, it was just kind of an oddity to get, just to have in the console collection. So over there, substantially cheaper, so I was very happy to pick it up. So there you go, the PC Engine Shuttle. And of course, it came with a controller and a power supply and all that kind of stuff, so there you go. Now, we're down to our last two pickups, both of which are currently hidden from camera. And I actually had to figure out which one I wanted to show you first and which one I wanted to show second, because they're both, in my mind, equally neat. But the one I have more to say about, I'm going to start with. Yeah, we're just going to do that. So I picked up, this will not sound exciting at first, but trust me, pretty cool. First thing I got of these two items is a game called Gundam Tactics Mobility Fleet 0079. Now you're probably like, okay, it's a Gundam game. Who gives a shit? Why are we watching this? Well, this was very fascinating to me because I could not believe I found it. I have been looking essentially for this for well over a year. So let me just kind of cut to the chase here. This game is for the Apple Pippin. Oh yes, I found an Apple Pippin game. Now the Apple Pippin, long story short, I've already done a video on it, is Apple's one and only game console. It was the briefest of stints into the 5th generation. The last one, actually the most powerful console of that generation, would basically never really existed. It came out in Japan and actually sold some units, sold about like 10,000 units, something like that. And then it was released in the States and only a few hundred units were sold. And then in Europe, its release was so brief, there's estimates that it never even reached 100 units sold. It was actually recalled from both Europe and North America, and all remaining units were sent to Japan where they thought they could at least kind of get rid of them. The reason for all this is just as they were launching it is when Steve Jobs came back to Apple and he decided to kill that program right away, pretty much out of spite. As a result, the content for it is extraordinarily hard to find. In Japan is the best spot you would have and the best chance you would have of finding any games or consoles or anything for it. But while I actually own an Apple Pippin, it's actually the only piece of Apple technology I own. I bought mine online from an Amazon seller in Japan who sent it to a buddy of mine in Japan who then mailed it to me along with a whole bunch of stuff. So I had that, but even he said, I can't find games for this thing anywhere. And when I went to Osaka, every store I went to, looked around. We even went to a couple of Super Potatoes and asked them specifically, like Apple Pippin, Game Soften, you know, something like that. And they were just like, no. They had the console, but they laughed at the notion that they would have any games for it. Every book off I've ever hit up, every hard off, everything, every hypermedia shop, every random fucking game store I have ever found in Japan, in any city, any area, I have never, ever seen even one hint of an Apple Pippin game, sans the Osaka Super Potato that had the console, but even they didn't have the games. So this random hard off at the top of the mountain, it had a single game. And it was Gundam Tactics Mobility Fleet 0079. And I was thrilled to find it. Because not only do I now have a game for that console, it's just cool to even know what to look for. Because I honestly didn't know what I was really supposed to be looking for. I've never seen a spine of an Apple Pippin game before. I've never seen the back of one. I've never seen the front of one. I didn't know, I mean, I knew what the logo looked like, but beyond that, I didn't know. So now I actually know exactly what to read for on the back. So what I kind of figured was if I was ever going to find one, it was probably going to be in like the used PC game section and probably under all the stuff that says Macintosh. And I was half right about that because it does say Macintosh all over it, but it also very specifically denotes the term Pippin. And because of that, that's how I know for sure to look for Pippin stuff. That and the spine also says it. So it's just, it was kind of exciting, man. Like how often are you going to get to have that experience where you find a game for a console you own, but you had no idea what the games are even supposed to look like. I'm probably never gonna have an experience like that again, where you just look, for the first time, you find a game for a console of any type. It's just strange. It's very fascinating. So it's definitely cool to pick that up, and hopefully if, I get to find more of them in the future, although I'm not betting on that. Like I said, this was one of those top of the mountain stores, and that expression is very literal. My buddy Fox kind of coined it. When you're in Japan and you're going to all these book offs and hard offs, they're very common. They're like Starbucks. They are everywhere. Very commonly what you'll end up doing is you'll find, oh, hey, there's one right by each train station. And of course, those you can get to very easily, but so can everyone else. And as a result, they're not, I'm not gonna say picked clean, but they're gonna have less content, less exciting content. But every once in a while, they build one kind of in the middle of nowhere, one that especially a tourist or a foreigner is not going to have an easy time getting to. But my buddy and I have actually made pilgrimages to some of these. We infamously did one down in Yokosuka. There's one way the hell in down south in Yokosuka, like almost in the center. Like you look at it on a map and you would have no idea that it's that hard to get to. You take a train and then you walk for a long time. You literally walk up a mountain. And when you get to the top of the mountain, there's like this town up there. And so that town, all their stuff, they just dump it into this book off and this hard off, but nobody ever comes up to take that stuff. And the town itself doesn't really take that stuff either because they're just dumping it in there. Sure, like obviously some of them come in and buy things, but for the most part, it's kind of untouched. So I found another one like that near the Yokohama area. And that's the one where I not only found this, but I found a bunch of this stuff, just kind of, including the PS3 here that was cheap. It was just a whole bunch of stuff that's just there, boxed, good condition, stuff you never really see because it's just too hard for most people to get to and most people don't care. In Japan, the whole collecting market isn't really that much of a thing. So a lot of the places that have been picked clean are usually by people like myself, you know, foreigners and tourists and stuff. So those are the best ones because my people, if you will, don't really want to make the effort to go out to those places most of the time, especially because driving around there is such a pain in the ass. So I'm happy that I did it though. It's totally worth it because I got some cool shit. And now I'm going to show you the last item on said list. This one was a different store. It was technically a super book-off bazaar, which is kind of like a used Walmart, for lack of a better word, but with all Japanese products. But at the same time, it's hard off because inside this super book-off bazaar, there's a bunch of different stores. There's a super book-off bazaar, but there's also like a grocery store, and there was a hard off and a hobby off. So technically this purchase I got came from the hard off inside of it. And it was pretty cool. It was a console, and they had two of them, which really surprised me, but I'll just show you. This is the Sega SG1000 II. This is the second iteration of Sega's first home game console. Their first home game console was the SG1000, which actually was about a year ago that a guy named Levi Roach actually sent me one of those, also in the box. Again, thank you for that if you still watch the channel. But this is the refresh model, if you will, and this one's actually more common. But I still had only seen it like once before, and it was vastly more expensive than this hard off wanted. This one came obviously with the box, and it came with the manuals and the original registration and all that stuff. My buddy was actually fascinated. He was looking through the manuals and things, and he saw the original receipt from this thing, purchased in like 1983, and he was just like, that's fucking cool. Like the original owner's name was on it, the store like employee who signed it, it was all there, and he was just like, that's just neat, man. So yeah, this is the SG1000 II right here. And I'll do a video on this eventually along with the SG1000 regular model, but yeah, just kind of give you guys a quick look at it. That's a piece of history right there, man. That is Sega's first home console, granted the second refresh of it. Because in the West, we foolishly tend to think that the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive was actually Sega's first console, which is demonstrably false because we even got the Master System, as did Europe and everywhere else. But most commonly, at least my fellow Americans tend to refer to the Genesis as the Sega, which always driven me nuts. But in Japan, like they started way earlier. I mean, this was the second iteration of their first console. So that's definitely really, really cool in my opinion. So yeah, anyway, that's everything I got from Hard Off. So I hope you enjoyed it. I will have more videos in the future of all sorts of cool stuff. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.